My name is Patrick Donnelly, and I'm on a mission to build better leaders. U.S. Space Force Senior Leader, Lieutenant General Doug Schiess, joined me at AFA's Warfare Symposium earlier this year to share several of his lessons learned and valuable leadership advice. Even though I've known and admired him for years, I learned a lot from this conversation, particularly about the importance of intentional mentorship and clear, timely feedback. Two things leaders often don't do as well as we should. I was both convicted and inspired to do better, and I hope you will be too. So, with no further ado, prepare yourself for four-dimensional chess.
Patrick, it's great to be with you, and it's been a pleasure to serve with you in our Air Force before I transferred to the Space Force, but thanks for having me. It's a great thing that you're doing, and I'm always excited to talk about leadership.
Thank you so much. You know, sitting here next to you with all those stars, it's a little daunting, even though I knew you back when. So I want to take some of that pressure off myself, and I want to go way back. I want to go way back to Lieutenant Schiess, recently graduated from UCLA ROTC, with his gold butter bars shining as he shows up to his first assignment. And it's Lieutenant Schiess wrestling with, I have this rank of authority, and yet my confidence level is actually quite low. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do, and I have a couple. I think a couple stories I can use to talk about that. So, in that day and age, ICBM operator, and so you show up at Vandenberg, then Air Force Base, for about 4 to 5 months of training before you go to your first operational base, which for me was the 321st. It just changed from the Strategic Missile Wing to the 321st Missile Wing at Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. And so, you know, like you said, you get commissioned, you got the bar, maybe a couple ribbons that, you know, you got from just joining the Air Force, really. But you're trained up. You know how to do your job to the minimal level that you need to do, and then you show up at this operational base. And I think what was interesting is, both from a leadership and a followership standpoint, is you get your first, and in my case, I was a deputy crew commander, and then you meet your crew commander. And it's kind of interesting that you're a deputy crew commander because there's nobody that you're administratively responsible for, but you go out to this missile launch control center that has, at that time, 10 nuclear missiles, or missiles with nuclear warheads on them. And you actually have to sign that you accept custody of these nuclear missiles. You have a little bit of training when you get there, but you're a brand new second lieutenant. My boss was a First Lieutenant Jeff Harlan, and he was prior enlisted and had a line number for Master Sergeant before he went to OTS. But you get to the point where you're going to go out on what we call our first alert. And so you go to the pre-departure meeting, and you get all the, you know, the intel, all the logistics that's going to happen, any maintenance that's going to happen in the site. And so that deputy crew commander part comes in because there are people out at the site that don't administratively work for you day to day, but when you're on alert, they do. You know, you're the deputy there. So you got facility managers, you've got defenders, you've got maintenance teams that are coming in and out of the field. But you have to be the lieutenant that's, you know, that you're on the other end of the line, like, hey, can we do this? Is this the right thing to do? And so, you know, we pulled out in the 1972 Suburban to, you know, this is 1993, but the 1972 Suburban to drive out to our site, which is a couple-hour drive from the base. We drive out, and the deputy always drove out so the commander could rest while you're driving out to the site. So we drive out, we go out the gate, and we turn onto the highway to get out. And my crew commander, Lieutenant Harlan, says, pull the vehicle over. I'm like, holy smokes. We just left the base, and I've already screwed up, you know. And so we pull over, and he says, Doug, he's like, we have a 2-hour drive. I'm going to take a nap on the way out, but I want you to think about on that 2 hours what kind of officer you're going to be, what kind of leader you're going to be. Are you going to do the things that you're supposed to do by the regulations? Are you going to do the things that you need to do to take care of your people? Because you can never have today over. This is your first day in operational Air Force, and however you do today, that starts your career. And you can recover from mistakes, but set your mind straight. Sure enough, you know, pulled out a little pillow, went to sleep, and I had 2 hours to think about it.
Can I just interrupt here and say that Lieutenant Harlan was probably far more squared away than was Lieutenant Donnelly at the time?
Yeah, he had other experience, and so So I did. I had the 2 hours to think. We got there. We took our crew changeover. We got into doing our mission. And then that afternoon, after a lot of the opportunities or maintenance activities and things were done for the day, he's like, what'd you think about? And so we talked about those kind of things. And that was really the first time where I was like, oh, we had done book leadership. We had done the things that, you remember from the academy and from ROTC, but we hadn't really talked about it in a practical level, or here are the experiences. And so that was eye-opening for me to do that. A second story in that area was, months later, it's freezing cold, North Dakota, I don't know, 32 below, whatever. And you would come back from alert and you would have classified information, you have stuff that you'd have to then pass off when you got back. And so we were walking in, and you could argue whether this is right or not. You could just put the big parka hat over, or do you have the hat on under the parka, and then, customs and courtesies or whatever. So I was walking in with a suitcase with the stuff, and a senior airman was walking out of the building. And the senior airman didn't salute me when we walked by, and so I didn't do anything. I just walked into the building. And the next thing, I just hear this incredible voice just booming, "Lieutenant, come back here." And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And I turn around, and I don't remember what they called him back then. I don't think it was command chiefs, but the highest ranking chief in the wing is standing there. And he goes, "I'm about ready to go find that senior airman and have a talking to, but before that, I need to have a talking to you." And he's like, "I know it's cold. I know it's whatever, but you have an opportunity to make sure he doesn't just walk by a problem." And he walked by a problem, and you didn't. I said, "Am I the problem?" He's like, "Yeah, you are the problem." And then, and he said, "Sir, have a great day. Let's not let this happen again." I was like, "Oh, I don't know if that's really that important," that the guy saluted me as I walked in. But it made me think, hey, you can never walk by a problem, because if you did, that's the new standard. And then the next time you walk by that problem, it gets to be cemented into that. And so those are the kind of the two lieutenant lessons that I remember for that time.
I think you were really fortunate in having those two people that crossed your path so early. If you were to look back now, based on those lessons and the things that you've learned since that time, what advice would you give to young officers who are sort of in that same situation, and maybe they don't have a Lieutenant Harlan or a chief who's giving you that on-the-spot feedback? What advice would you give them in terms of how to prepare themselves to be successful from the start when their competence level doesn't yet really match their authority that they've got?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, I was just a few weeks ago down at UCLA to my old detachment talking to cadets, and I realized how much younger they are than I remember being. But what I would say there, and I do this, sometimes at my headquarters, we don't have a lot of young lieutenants. Most of them are out in the field. But when Chief Timmerman and I go walking around, we do interact with young folks. And so, but when I do get the opportunity to talk to them, I remind them that while they are a leader, because they are a second lieutenant, that's the definition. You are an officer. You have to be a leader from day one. You also have to have the credibility. And so you have to become a technical expert in whatever your job is. And so for on the space world, that's a weapon system. We're redoing our officer training course so that every officer is going to be an operator, whether that's a space operator, a cyber operator, or intel operator, even before they then go on to acquisition or program management. You have to be an expert in your weapon system, because you're going to be leading a lot of young folks that have already had experience in that weapon system, and they're looking to see, have you done your homework? Have you done what you need to do to be able to give them credibility? They don't need you to tell them how to do the weapon system. They know how to do that, but they need to know when the chips are down or when things aren't good that they can come to you and that you're going to be a leader. But one of the first things that they look at is, do you know what you're doing? Do you know, from your experience as a defender, I'm sure they're looking at, does this guy know how to use whatever weapon they're using? Does this gal know what's going on? Because then that gives them the credibility to come to you with the tougher questions. And so I tell them, hey, when you get there, whatever it is, even in the Air Force, if it's you're a personnel officer or you're a public affairs officer or services, you have to know the mission. You have to be an expert in the areas that you're responsible for, so that you have that credibility, so then they look to you to be the leader that they can come to. So.
It's great advice. I think you're right. It's to have authority without competence is asking people to really have blind faith. And so focusing on that as a first task is probably the exact right answer. So let me shift gears just a little bit. I know you're aware of this leadership model that we're teaching now. For our listeners, in a nutshell, we teach a model. It's called Lead, Develop, Care. And Lead, Develop, Care are the three things that every leader must do proficiently in order to be a successful leader. And when I think about that in terms of my experience in the Air Force, and when I listen to the airmen and guardians that we've spoken to around the world over the last year and a half, it seems to me that the area that we are most maybe lacking in, or the area that falls off the plate first, is in that development sphere. And I'm always reminded of a quote that I heard General Goldfein say, the former Air Force Chief of Staff. He said that one of the key tasks of every commander is to develop those in their command to their fullest potential. I mean, that's a heavy burden to lay on someone. My job is to develop someone to their fullest potential. And I think that part of the reason for that is that we just get busy. We just don't have time. There's so many other things to do that idea of one of my key jobs is to develop people underneath me. I'm curious, when you think about that aspect, how important is intentional development to you? And do you have any ways that you try to keep that forefront in your mind to develop those that are coming behind you?
Yeah, Patrick, thanks for that. And, you and I have worked together before, and so I know that you did that as well. I think as you grow in responsibility, you can start to forget about that because you have so many, like you just said, so many other tasks. There's an iPhone somewhere here that, the emails are piling up already. But I continually tell myself that we've got to build the next generation to be able to take our spots. One day, Debbie's going to say, hey, it's time for us to, find a white picket fence with a porch and sit on it for a while. But I want to make sure that we're bringing the next generation up at the right to the right level of leadership. And so you have to develop them. I think for me, what I do is I look back at the mentors that developed me. And that, that's an interesting conversation, mentors or whatever. And so there can be structured programs there. But I think sometimes it's just bosses or different people that you've interacted with that maybe you gel and having that conversation. I realize now from some of the mentors that would every once in a while check in on me, that's not easy for them to do. Maybe we have some capabilities or technology now where it can put a text Patrick today, or I haven't done a great job of doing that yet, but someone will come to my mind and I'll be like, hey, can I take the next 3 minutes to just text this person, ask them how things are going? And then that starts the conversation where they may go, well, hey, sir, actually, I'm thinking about what's next for me. Can we have a conversation? And my staff will tell you that I never tell anybody no when they say they want to have a conversation with me about something. I might not even really know them very well, which makes it kind of hard to have some of those conversations. But, if someone emails me and says, hey, can I talk to you about something? I'll say, sure. Hey, here's my scheduler. Is this an emergency? Do we need to talk right today? If not, then let's get on the schedule to do that. So that's what I do. And that never stops. I have you text me. I've got retired friends that will text me. As a matter of fact, just had the vice commander when I was a wing exec just passed away recently from cancer. And it hit me pretty hard because I knew that about every 2 months I would get a text from him. He's a retired guy doing great things out in, the world. And I realized I'm not going to get that text anymore. And so, and sometimes that text just came at the right time to say, hey, thinking about you or whatever. So those are just the little things you can do to help develop. But more specifically, you have to look at, what is the right next step for this individual? Is it time for them to get a job of increasing responsibility? Is it time for them to go to school? Is it time for them to do that? And you have to remember back to, Debbie will remind me of this all the time. Debbie's my wife, by the way. She's like, remember what you felt like when that was going on and how this could be something totally huge when now you're like, well, that's not a big deal. And so, make sure that you're not telling that person this is not a big deal. This is obviously important in their lives. And so doing that. But it does bring me back to one of my, you remember our old feedback forms where you get the little X where you were on things?
Yes.
And sometimes people did them and sometimes people didn't. But I was a captain in the 2nd Space Launch Squadron. And actually, he's probably around here. Dr. Tom Walker was my ops officer, and I got my feedback. I was the chief of training, and I walked in, and one area was not to the far right. And I instantly saw that on the paper. We hadn't got to that thing, and I was like, man, what is, I was focused on what's that area. And essentially what he said was, and I don't remember what category it was, he said, hey, you got to use all the tools in the toolbox. Don't just pick the best one every time. Give some give some responsibility to others, because if you don't do it, you don't know if they're going to rise to the occasion, and maybe you could just help them. You could develop them into something else, and they're just waiting for someone to do that. And I remember pushing back a little bit, but you want the best from me, so I'm going to pick the best people from my team. He's like, yeah, you should do that, but you need to put them aside with someone that maybe is struggling, help them get to the next level. And I've carried that forward, that, you got to help people get to the level that they may just not know that they have this inside of them to do this, or no one's taken the time to talk to them about how you can be better at different things. And so it really becomes, it can be overarching of, hey, I've got my people that I've got to rate on and do that. But it also can just be personal. You're going to have a conversation with someone. So I'm sorry, I rambled there a little bit.
No, that was great.
But, yeah.
Because actually getting into feedback, I think, is a really interesting point to go here, because it is so essential to developing someone. And that first step, as you just said, is discovery. What is it I need to develop you in, or how can I develop you? Sometimes it's obvious there's an area that they're just not measuring up. In other areas, they're doing everything well, but you're shifting gears to, and how can I make you even better? How do I prepare you even further from where you are right now? Yeah, I had many feedback sessions that weren't quite so helpful. Most of my feedback sessions, I don't really recall ever getting something that I felt moved me forward. And it wasn't because I was always down the right side. But being able to deliver feedback effectively in a world where we feel like we're all in competition, and that if I'm not all the way to the right, and if anybody has any sort of constructive feedback to give me, that must mean I'm failing. How do you as a leader give feedback in a way that can be received as a positive and not just seen as he's disappointed in me, right, or I've fallen short of him?
Yeah. No, and it's difficult because you can take the high performers that come in and go, I really don't have anything to tell you. Keep doing what you're doing. But they're looking for something. And so that's where I, with on that side of the equation, that's where I try to find something that I can just say, even if it's like, hey, maybe you want to read this book about, this was really helpful for me in this area, or ask them questions like, what kind of things are you thinking that you're maybe not doing as well as you think you could? Sometimes I'll be like, no, you're doing that pretty good. Or others than that helps me with the conversation of where I can help them. On the other end, where folks are not, you need to provide feedback to help them be a better performer or be a better leader. I generally just start with just telling them the truth, and having that conversation of, here's an area that I just think you're not doing as well as you could be. But then you have to give them mechanisms to get after that. And so just telling them that they're not good at that is not going to do much. Maybe they'll go out and find some way to be better at that. But I think you have to have a plan of, hey, so let me, a perfect example is maybe your personality is pretty, this is the way things are, and this is the way things that should be done. But you work with people that personality rubs them the wrong way. And so you don't change your own personality, but you have to look at everybody else and go, hey, what are the ways that I can connect with this person, that I can help them be better, or that we can work together better? And so, I'm not telling anybody that they're not doing a good job, but I'm telling them, hey, here's some things that I've seen, especially as you rise in rank and responsibility, that if you don't figure this out now, could come back to haunt you. So I think being very specific. Mm-hmm. And when you have a performer that is not performing, you shouldn't tell them, yeah, everything's great, thanks. You should tell them that this is not going well. And you don't necessarily have to wait till the feedback time. Right. There's feedback all the time. My aide-de-camp's in here somewhere, and she's like, every time we're traveling, she's getting feedback. She's also giving me feedback, and so I'm sure she will be much excited to go on to some other job where she's not getting all that feedback. But it's a constant discussion. It's not a paper that happens once between performance reports. So
Yeah, I think that's so effective, that ongoing sense and that ongoing intentionality from the senior to the junior. What is it about you that either needs a little work or that you can just become better in that you don't know yet? And I think if you're not being intentional about that, it's one of those things that just slips away, and before you know it, they've either PCS'd or it's time for the feedback and you realize you really don't have anything.
Yeah, and if I could go back a little bit, because you mentioned competition. You and I both were group commanders at the same time, and I remember that feeling, that interesting feeling of being a commander of commanders, but then there was a wing commander that everybody was looking to, and being able to talk to those squadron commanders to go to validate to them, yes, you're in competition. At the end of the day, you're going to get stratified of where you are, but competition doesn't mean taking the other person down. It means, and I know you and I talked about this, it's like which commander is working with all the other commanders to make the whole group and the wing better. That's the person that you want to do. So given that feedback, validating that they are in competition, because I think sometimes they're like, am I the only one that thinks we're in competition? And I also told them, hey, you guys all can talk to each other. You can give each other feedback, and you shouldn't be afraid of that. And so I do think we overemphasize the competition part, but we know that it's there. And so you just got to know that it's there and just do the best of your abilities and work together. So
yeah, I can piggyback on that a little bit, because as you mentioned, we were together in a competing groups per se. I was the mission support group commander, you were the ops group commander. And I think the real reason you told that story is because in the end, you're a 3-star and I retired as a colonel, which means you clearly won that competition.
That's not why I was telling the story, but that is, yeah.
But to reinforce what you said, while there was this reality of there's only so many people that are going to move forward, and we were all aware of that, I got to say, it was so nice to have you a couple of doors down, and the times we would go to breakfast and we would just talk. We would sometimes whine about things, sometimes help each other out in some different areas. And even though there was that reality, it never stopped us from really trying to help each other be as successful as possible.
Yeah, and I think we were also solving our boss's problems. We were having breakfast, maybe with the vice commander or the other group commanders or just you and I don't think you felt this way. I never felt like, if I could solve this problem first, then I was like, hey, how can we solve this problem together so we take something off our boss's plate?
Yeah, I wish I was mature enough to think that way at the time. Hey, let's go back to feedback for a second, because you mentioned your aide de camp and the fact that she even's giving you feedback from time to time. We've traveled all over the world. We've engaged with about 1,800 airmen and guardians, and one of the pieces of feedback that I hear very often as we ask them to share some leadership challenges that they're experiencing, I guess I thought originally that everybody was going to focus on, these are issues I'm having with those that I supervise. And yet many times people are struggling with, I'm having an issue with my supervisor, and I don't know how to communicate that to them. I don't know how to influence effectively up the chain. And the fact that you mentioned your aide is giving you feedback, how important is it for you to receive feedback, or even perhaps when you're sitting at a table and you toss out an idea, how sincere are you about, hey, I really want to know what you think?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because, there might be people that are just like, I'm not going to say anything. But when I give a feedback session, one of the questions I ask is, hey, how do you think I'm doing my job? What feedback can I do to help you do your job? And when you do that, it gets around. But the first couple times, they just kind of look at you. And so
You're great.
Yeah.
You're great, sir.
You are handsome and powerful. But which we know is not true. But what I would say is, once that starts to get around, then they start to think of things like, this might be a good opportunity for me to bring something up. But I think, so that's one way with just the feedback.
Okay.
The other way is, when the team and I are traveling or we're going, and maybe I do an all call with a subordinate unit or something, maybe it's my own insecurity, but I want to know what they thought from that. And sometimes they're like, sir, I was planning the next place we were going to and I wasn't listening to you or whatever. Normally they'll be like, hey, sir, you said this, but the other day you said it a little bit differently. And I think that one connects a little bit more than this one. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Thanks. But you have to have the heart and the personality to go, all right, this person's going to lay it on the line. I had my previous director of public affairs, the very first event where I was on a stage doing stuff, we walked off. I didn't ask for any feedback. I was going to, but she gave me a lot of feedback. I'll be honest, at first I was like, that's not fun. But then I learned that's her personality, but it was good stuff. And so then I've got to be mature enough to go, okay. And some of it I'm like, that's just me. That's how I do things. And then go back and go, that's just me. That's how I do things. Is that really critical to getting the message across? Well, no, sir, I just thought this or whatever. So I think the give and go back is important on that. So I think you just have to have the attitude and the approachability that can happen. I think to your question, you're in a room and you say something. One, and I'm trying to be better at this, is I try not to say what I think before I go, hey, does anybody else in the room think something? Because if I say what I think, they're like, that's a great idea. And not always, but especially with
that's
people
tendency,
people
sure.
that know me or have worked with me longer may do that. But if I have the opportunity to not say something first, I'll ask other people to chime in. The other thing I do at this level is I screw this up sometime, but I'll never leave the meeting if the chief is with me without saying, Chief, do you have anything that you'd like to add? Or is there anything that you want to bring up? And there are times where she just has a different perspective than I do, from her many decades of service as well. And I've just seen bosses that don't do that. And then you have chiefs that are trying to get in, and then it's awkward, where if and I know she's going to speak up if there's something that she needs to speak up, but I always want to make sure that at the last minute I've gotten whatever else from her. And a lot of times she'll just say, no, sir, I don't have anything to add. But it then allows the rest of the people to say, hey, he's going to always ask the chief. I do the same thing. I'll go around the room, at least for the directors or the commanders. Hey, do you agree with that? And so I do tell people, too, that I have this knack of looking at someone and realizing that they have something to say and they're not going to say it. So I will call that person out. I will just say, hey, you look like you were going to say something. And sometimes they'll be like, no, I just had a little indigestion or something.
Right.
But sometimes they'll be like, no, you're right, sir. I think I need to bring this up. Well, we should have brought it up. So let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, if everybody's on board with, are we trying to move us to a better place? Like you mentioned, your first public affairs person. Once you recognize that his or her aim is to try to make things better,
Right.
then it becomes much easier to, in the end, she's trying to make me more successful. She's trying to make us and our mission more successful. It's much easier to receive that. We talk about in our lead, develop, care model that when it comes to develop, you can develop someone in their skills, their behavior, or their thinking. And what you were just talking about, I think, really gets at that behavior piece. If you're looking at and you're trying to figure out, how do I develop somebody to move up, sometimes it's not a skills issue. Sometimes it's some quirk in their behavior. And if we're honest, what's the thing that most often stops someone's career progression? It's not a skills problem. It's something about their behavior, which usually has its roots in thinking. And so I love the way you're trying to get at that a little bit differently. How can I help you be more vulnerable or more thick-skinned or more willing to accept that sort of feedback? Because you're setting a model for them to be able then to go do that down the chain as well.
Hey, if I could real quick, I think you were saying probably younger folks, like how do I influence up, or you were talking about that. But for me, I'm always thinking what my boss's boss is trying to think, which I rapidly go to, I have no idea. I don't have the experience for that. But that helps me think about how I can help my boss. And so how can I influence my boss? It doesn't have to be this, hey, sir, I think you should do this. But the conversations that we have, the things that we do, younger folks can do that too. It's just building the conversation you have with either your frontline supervisor or your squadron commander or whatever. I know that's tough, but you've got to build the ability to put that out there. Now, if you put something out every time and they're like, stop talking to me, then maybe you're doing it too often. But I think having the ability to go, you and I remember how it was like, I don't know that I'm going to say anything right here. And so when it's the right time and you have something, you should say it. converse of that is, if this is really not in your area of expertise and you really don't have anything to say, you're just feeling like you need to say something, probably not the time to say something.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's that you got to think through that. So
Yeah, that's a great point. And I really like the emphasis you gave there about thinking about your boss's boss. And I think if I was going to change the words in that a little bit, if you're a person struggling with how do I influence up the chain, if you can figure out a way to communicate, this is how I think we can be more successful. And because ultimately, every supervisor wants to be successful. It doesn't matter what level of that chain. I want us to be successful. If you can convey that feedback in a way that's coming across as, this is a way I think we can be more successful instead of you're doing something wrong, it's much easier to accept.
no, I think that's great.
Okay, so let me shift gears a little bit. This has been great so far, but I want to move into a completely different area. And you've brought up your wife, Debbie, a couple of times. I know, just like me, you married way up. And Debbie is a sweet, wonderful, professional, super capable woman. I've talked to a lot of people who are especially young, especially when I talk to cadets or young lieutenants, and they want to know, what's the secret to sort of managing a work-life balance? How do I have a family and still put forth the energy and the effort I need to be successful in my career? And I just think you and Debbie and your two daughters who've been wildly successful in their own right now as adult women, how did you do that? Do you have any thoughts or advice that you might give?
Yeah, we've learned along the way. I think if Debbie was here, she would remind me that I said we were doing this for 5 years, and so she's wondering when that 5 years is up. But first off, I'll say dynamics have changed. There are more dual income families, more mill spouses, and Debbie wanted to have a place in the workforce, but it just didn't work out at first. She eventually did, as you know, and did that, but even though she wasn't out in the workforce, she would say the best way to keep her on the team, I guess, and do that is to make her feel a part of what we're doing, make it feel a part of her sacrifices, and her work is also in the service of our nation. And I think some people, when you say that, whether it's a male spouse or a female spouse, they kind of go, well, that doesn't make sense. But to her, and I think to a lot of them, if they can feel like they're a part of it, then it makes it better than, the long nights, the TDYs, the being deployed for a year, those kind of things. And so then how do you do that? Well, one, communicate. Like, this is what's going on. Like, oh, by the way, which I just did yesterday, there's an exercise next week. I will probably work longer hours than I normally do. You don't want to do that on Monday night while you're there late to do that, because then she knows next week this is going to be the things that are coming. What she did also, she's like, hey, can the key support leaders, put a popcorn stand out in front of the doors in front of the building? She thinks of those things that I don't think, because she knows that folks are going. So that communication. And she'll say, when she talks to other spouses, she'll say that she has that same conversation. The spouses will say, well, my husband or my wife said that they can't tell me anything about what they do. And then she'll bring them over to me and say, is that true? And I got it. Young guardians, young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, they've got classified information, and they're like, I can't say anything. My favorite was when I was the commander of the 4th Space Operations Squadron, where we were flying the Milstar strategic missile, or strategic communication system. We were at an event, and all of a sudden I see Debbie and this spouse and this staff sergeant coming over, and I'm like, okay, this is gonna be interesting. What's gonna happen here? We were at and it was, Doug, Staff Sergeant so-and-so says he can't tell his spouse anything about what he does. The staff sergeant is looking at me like, this is not fun. And,
back me up, sir.
Yeah. Right? And I'm like, he does a lot of things that are at the classified level. But what we can tell you is he operates geosynchronous, geostationary satellites. Oh, by the way, that means it's at the same place above the Earth every day. And these satellites provide the communication for the President of the United States to be able to communicate orders to all of his forces even in the event of a nuclear war. And he's the guy that's doing that every day when he comes on and the wife's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were doing something important. And he's looking at me like, I guess I could have said that. So I think, part of the thing is, say what you can say so that they can be a part of what that spouse is probably not telling everybody. Oh, my husband's in the Air Force. He works at Schriever, then Air Force Base, and he's doing these things. Well, That helps us with recruiting. That helps us with that helps us recruit that spouse to want to stay a part of the team. And so I think big part of it is communication. I will say, Debbie didn't really start working till later in our career, but folks are doing that much younger and that. But then there's the other way around where I got to know that she's not going to be there because she's on a business trip or something. And so it goes back to communication and doing that. I get asked a lot about balance. Sir, how did you balance, 30, almost 33 years? How did you do that? And what I say back to them is, I don't like the word balance, because balance would mean I got a scale and I've put, and I'll be honest with you, and you know this, a lot of times it's up here, work's down here, personal life's up here. I call it harmony now, and I know there are going to be times where I'm not going to be as engaged. Like you said, our daughters and our son-in-law are adults now. I still got to find a way to connect with them, making sure I'm connected with them. But when they were little, I would say I never missed the championship soccer game. I missed a whole bunch of soccer games. I never missed the final play. I did miss a high school graduation, but I was deployed. But I tell people, don't miss the really important stuff. You're not that important that we can't find somebody else to do this for, do something for you for that 2 hours, that 3 hours. And so I think it's finding the way to harmonize through that so that you can be a part. I mean, if Caitlin and Kendra were here, I'd hope they'd say, yeah, my dad was there when I needed him to be there. But they probably also remember the times where I wasn't there. And so I think it's part about doing that to the best of your ability, communicating, and trying to be there for the really big stuff. And then knowing that someone's got your back at work. Someone's going to, unless we're at war today, we can figure this out.
Yeah. So I like that. Not looking at it as a balance, but looking at it as a harmony. And the way to achieve the harmony is through communication. And more specifically, how do I create, instead of a dichotomy, how do I bring my family into the team so that we all feel connected to this mission that I'm a part of? Yeah, that's good. So let me just cut into one more thing here. When it comes to leadership, one of the most difficult aspects to lead well is leadership in crisis, or leadership when there's uncertainty. And, obviously when you think about the adversaries that we face, when you think about what's going on in the world, there's a lot of uncertainty. You think about what's going on in this nation, there's always uncertainty. Have you had an experience where you've had to lead through crisis, a story that maybe you could share, and how you did that, what you learned from that?
Yeah. And interesting, maybe if we have time, we'll talk about unknowns versus crisis. So unfortunately, Debbie and I actually, we're not gonna be able to do it this year, but we typically lead a course at the Delta Commanders course on leadership in crisis. I think that's because we've just had so many crises. I don't know if that's my fault or whatever, but we've had the opportunity to walk through some of those. And the one I'll share the most is I was a wing commander at Peterson, 21st Space Wing. We had deployable units that would go into harsh areas, combat areas, to do their mission because they had to be there. And one night, I received the call from forward that we had lost an airman. Wasn't in a combat situation, but in Syria. We were in Syria, and we lost him, Staff Sergeant Austin Biren. And, when these things happen, all the things that you thought were going to be in place weren't there. Squadron commanders is TDY to see one of our sites in UK. Group commander is on leave somewhere else. And so the first commander, besides the folks that are in Syria, is myself. And reporting that information up, that we had that, trying to find out, and then realizing the best person to inform this young spouse of her high school love is not coming home in the way that she thought is myself. And so Debbie and I, we'd gone through the training. We had to do that. But that night, we had to drive to a spouse's house and do the thing that you never want to do. Now, it turned out she was home, but she decided not to answer the door. And so we stayed outside the house. We were calling. And it wasn't until 2 o'clock in the morning that I got a hold of her. And then we had to do that. But then that started, years, but a month long of caring for that family, until the squadron commander and the group commander could get back, we were that. We were the people that did that, along with our chaplain and others. But I think what I learned the most from that is presence. I was a wing commander of a base, huge base. This was the most important thing that I was doing during that time. The vice wing commander was running things because I was focused on this family. And to the point where working what ROTC instructor in this state was going to go inform mom. And unfortunately, mom and dad were divorced, so who's going to tell dad? And working through all that, going to Dover and greeting Sergeant Barron when he came off the plane, and then being there at Peterson when he came back, and being there with his family as we did the memorials, and then sent him back off to his home to be. And the squadron commander, now Colonel Fernagle, he still interacts with that family. And I, the things of that interaction's probably slowed down, but that was the most important thing that I was doing during that time. The thing that Debbie and I both learned from that is we realized who was caring for us and the other people, the chaplain, the then called the key spouse, now the key support leader, the squadron commander. And so I took it on that, hey, I'm going to support that squadron commander, and Debbie's going to support his spouse, and we're going to make sure, because this is a long process. But we kind of, as we look back, I don't know that we did a great job of supporting that key spouse. We did support, but are you okay?
Right.
And then it was a while later where I realized I wasn't okay. I had put on the shield to do that thing, and then had to realize that affected me. And so that's where you go to your friends and your chaplain and your other folks to be able to do that. But so to wrap that up, sorry, that's probably a longer story than you needed.
It's great.
Is presence, being there to take care of this, allowing other people to take care of the mission while you are taking. The mission could be crisis. I also was the commander when a F-16 crashed, and so working through that. But presence with the family, presence with whoever that is, and then taking care of the people that are taking care of the family or others. Those are the things that you got to think about while you're doing this. And it's hard because it happens, and then you're on. There are checklists, but checklists don't have every branch and sequel that's out there, so.
Yeah, what a sad story. What a tough lesson to learn through a process like that. But that sense of presence that the boss has got me, there's an aspect of care that goes beyond just when I'm in the seat or I'm in the building. It extends beyond that. That's really good. You mentioned the F-16 crash as well, and I'm just curious, one of your colleagues, Lieutenant General Bratton, yesterday, had a great line when it came to leading a crisis, and he was sharing a compliment that he had been given by one of his airmen at one point. And he said, one of the greatest compliments I ever got was somebody said to me, "Hey, sir, when things are going crazy, you don't make it worse." Yeah. How important is just being able to maintain a consistency and an evenness when everything seems to be going on in terms of calming the rest of the organization?
Yeah, I love Sean Bratton, so thanks. I try to. I don't know how good I am to be as calm as possible when things are going on, because if you are calm, then the people around you can take a breath and realize, hey, the boss is okay, so we just got to do our job. And so that's difficult. Back to that one. Back to the F-16. Graduation at the Air Force Academy, Thunderbirds flying. President of the United States up at the Academy, Chief of Staff of the Air Force at the Academy, Secretary of the Air Force Academy, all coming back to Peterson to leave, and the F-16s are supposed to land, and one of them doesn't land. So first thing you're doing is, first call, crash net comes up, you're taking the call, is, all right, I'm not thinking about the President or the Secretary of the Air Force or the Chief of Staff. I'm thinking about that one pilot. What are we doing for that? Until we got the pilot and we knew that he was safe and got to the point where he was with medical care, that was my main concern. And then it was, okay, we need to make sure we can, as you know better than I do, put the national defense area around the F-16, make sure that we could keep it for the folks that would be doing the investigation. But I also it goes back to presence. I walked into the command post. They're busy as whatever, and I'm talking to them, hey, it's good, go. I went out to the site. I stood with the defenders for a little time, and what do you guys need? Well, sir, we don't have a bathroom. All right, we can fix that. We'll get a porta potty out there. But it's the presence of getting to the team to know what they need, but they also see you there and they know that you're calm, or at least you look like you're calm. And so then that helps everybody do that. So I try to do that. I'd say inside the rage is going on, but I'm trying to be as calm as possible. So
how did you learn to master that? Is that another thing that Debbie taught you?
Yeah, probably. Too much Debbie telling me to do that. I don't know. I think I'm a pretty calm person in the first place, but I think years of realizing there's nothing that you can do right now besides be the calming presence to keep everything down and keep everybody moving towards whatever the mission is. So
one of the things I learned in command or in leadership positions is that oftentimes successful leadership is about a performance. And I don't mean being disingenuous, but how do I pull up the performance that's needed right now in this situation? And sometimes that's, if I really need to make a point, then perhaps I put on the performance of I'm going to be really stern and I'm going to use a different tone of voice, when in reality, I'm really still pretty mild.
Yeah.
Or in a situation like that where there's all sorts of crisis and uncertainty and I'm feeling all this almost panic well up in me. Okay, what's the performance I need right now? The performance I need is to remain calm.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all you got.
Yeah.
But that conveying that, acting the right role at the right moment sometimes saves the day.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you have to be energetic and, I don't want to say loud, but sometimes you got to get a message across as well. And I remember a time when we were group commanders, and I don't know if you heard about it, but we were having a problem between two of my squadrons not really cooperating together. And it really came down to two of the civilians just not liking each other. And so we came up with this plan where we thought we could work through the civilian personnel office to have them switch jobs for a couple months. And so I went to the two squadron commanders and I said, hey, we're going to do this. And they were like, okay. Well, then they went and talked to the civilians, and they're like, no, they don't want to do this. And I said, I don't know that we asked. We're going to do this. And so then they both came back, and they're like, they want to hear it from you, whatever. So we set up this meeting. And I decided I'm going to go in. I'm going to tell them what we're going to do. And then, back to your feedback, I'm going to ask them what they think about it. The two of them in front of me decided to argue with each other and talk about how bad this would be. And then they almost started like, oh, we can get together on this. And then finally, I just was like, all right, slapped the table louder than I thought I was going to slap the table and said, this meeting is over. This is happening. Monday, you report there. Monday, you report there. And I walked out. And my deputy commander during that time, he came back. He's like, are you okay? I've never seen you do that before. But it was, I don't know if performance is the right word, but maybe. But it was for effect. It was like, I'm normally a calm person. They're taking advantage of that calmness, and I'm gonna not do that. So, one last on that happened to me is I was the wing exec for Colonel Larry James. Went on to be a 3-star general. I learned so much from him during that time. But I remember, and I don't remember the specifics, but between me and the command chief, we did not provide all the information we needed to our wing commander, and he got surprised by something. And it would be easy for me to say it was the command chief's fault, but whatever. Between the two of us, I'll never forget that he brought us into his office. We were both standing in front of his desk, and he was just looking down at his desk, and then he looked up and he said, I just want you two to know that I'm disappointed today. And then he said, thanks for what you're doing today or something. I walked back to my desk, and I'm like, I was devastated. He didn't need to yell at me. He just needed to say he was disappointed.
Right.
And so I think those are the extremes of performance or how you get the message across could be important to the person. And you have to just know when the right time to do that and not do it at the wrong time or not do it all the time, so then it's not effective.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so good. If only I had learned that earlier in my career. Hey, I really want you to know how much I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I know you're super busy, and as you said, your emails are now overflowing. But I really took a lot out of this conversation. I knew I would. I'm grateful for your friendship. I'm thankful for what you and Debbie and the rest of the family have contributed to this nation and will continue to contribute. And I feel so much better knowing that guys like you are in the positions that you're in. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you for listening to Building Better Leaders. If you'd like to learn more about the Doolittle Leadership Center or the leader development workshops we deliver all around the world, please visit us at www.afa.org/DLC. Helping you become a better leader is our passion and our purpose.